Hi, friend. Welcome back to the Mindset Check podcast. This is your host, Misha McKittrick. This is a podcast where we believe that as you take time for a mindset check, you have more power than you think you do, and where we believe that you have insane amounts of power in your life when you learn how to create your state. This is what we're going to finish diving into today with Jake for our part 2. I'm really excited to bring this to you guys. It's a great conversation, and it helps us just to take a moment to really be aware of what that means. So fun. Before we dive in, I want to make sure that you completely know about the free mini course that I'm offering. It actually starts tomorrow and Wednesday, and it is going to be so power-packed and fun. You're not going to want to miss it. The course is called Learning to Use the Power of Your Heart. And I'm really going to walk through why is it that I say, hey, let me teach you how to wake up to your heart so that you can create a life of bliss. What is it that your heart can actually provide for you? In this course, you'll be able to grasp that, and you'll be able to see really what your heart can do for you and what this power is inside of you that is already there. All you have to do is learn how to wake it up, how to ignite it, how to check in with it often so it can be something that helps give you energy in your life, that helps you fill up your tank, that helps you tap into your intuition, that helps you create incredible energy that benefits you and everyone that you interact with, that helps you create more harmony in your home just because the people around you get to also partake in this energy that you create for yourself. It's incredible. And don't worry if you're listening to this after the course has already taken place. There will be replays available. So just make sure that you check the show notes and it will be there waiting for you. Again, it's free. It's something that I'm offering for you just to get a bigger glimpse at what you can do to actually tap into this power that's inside of you. Okay, I can't wait. And hopefully I see you all tomorrow. Okay, so moving into the episode for today, just a recap because we always do. We have a few recaps going on. Season 1 was my story and, getting pregnant young and going through that kind of rocky road and that interesting start to my adult life, my adult living. And Jake then in season 2 tells his side of the story and how much contributed to us coming together and things that he went through that we can also really learn from. And his cousin Chase, they lost to suicide when Jake was a senior in high school. Man, that was such a story. And then we dive into telling you all about Jake's experience inside of suicide and how long he struggled with suicide ideation. A lot of that we talked about in part 1 of this episode, which was last week's. And now we're moving into part 2, which is essentially what would we have done differently and what are the most powerful takeaways that we can offer for you. That's what we're talking about today. So let's jump right in. All right, Jake.
We're back.
We're back. So we really want to zone in and focus on what do we know that would allow you insight if you're also going through this journey. Because now we would probably do some things differently, right? You go through something for a little bit and you think something's working and then something else starts to make sense. So something that really happened for me during all of this is that I took the marriage course. You remember the marriage course that I took?
Oh, yeah.
Why do you say it like that?
It was this awesome shift. Not that you needed to shift that much. It was just a way that you could help optimize things for me.
Mm-hmm. One thing I will say is I think we always all need to shift. All of us, we're consistently growing, and to be able to know that we need to shift often is just a mark of our maturity. I think that that's a really good thing to know, because I learned things that were pivotal for me in that course, like how you how women emasculate men. That was a really big one for me, to be able to see like the way that I was contributing to creating the situation that we had. But there was something that I learned in that course that was pivotal for the way that you and I functioned. I mean, obviously it's a marriage course, but I learned that there were actions and ways that I could function that allowed the men in my life to sort of respond differently. It was really powerful. And it worked.
Are you still doing those things? I don't remember exactly what it all was.
Well, the biggest thing is that I actually got frustrated doing them, because I realized that I was doing them and that it was making your days great, but it was reliant upon me. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so I remember having a conversation with you once I finally like put together what was going on, because sometimes things are happening and you're not quite putting two and two together. And I remember talking to you about it and being able to bring about the idea that my request was that you made the shift yourself, that you weren't reliant upon me complimenting you or all of the different tactics and the things that I had learned to help you come into a good space. In other words, women truly have the ability to make men putty in their hands.
How?
But I didn't want that to be my responsibility. Do you remember when I talked to you about that?
I don't, but it's just interesting to think about this, because it just makes so much sense that nobody should be living a life where their happiness or fulfillment or whatever they desire to experience each day is contingent on if somebody else is helping them get to that state.
Okay, so good that you know that, like now. Right?
I just didn't want to tell you. I knew it back then too. I wanted to test you. You passed. Oh my gosh.
But you know, the reality is waking up to that. Because I didn't know, like way, way back, I was catering and making everything happy and hunky-dory because I knew you were under enormous amounts of stress and pressure. Once you started to get better, you still had these learned patterns in your hormones, right? In your chemical makeup, in your brain. You still had these patterns.
Sure. And you look now at everything that you've learned about brain science and what would be so off with my subconscious brain.
Right. But I didn't know that.
Right. Like this became anything about the brain, consciousness, subconscious became way higher level stuff.
Right.
It's all just been like this stepping stone.
Exactly. So I took the marriage course and it made us sail for a while until I realized. And then I made a request of you that I wanted you to understand that, like, I didn't want to make those shifts happen for you. Like, I was happy to assist and to propel and to, like, let those thoughts and feelings authentically come from me. But I didn't want your state to be dependent on how I was acting. Mm-hmm. And then I remember, too, that I had this little bit of an awakening where I got really ticked because I was driving in the car one day with one of my friends, and I was like, ugh, you don't have to go to Disneyland to have a good day. And I was really mad because I thought
I haven't had very many good days at Disneyland.
That's actually true. That's true.
It's exhausting.
It's true.
That fits in the top 5 of, vacations that you take that you need a vacation from. I don't know. Vacation.
There's a lot of people who love Disneyland, Jake. But the point is it was just like a different way to say something, which is basically saying you don't need a good reason to be able to have a good day, And I was starting to realize those things. I was starting to learn enough things that I knew that. And I wrote a speech about that for Toastmasters. Do you remember it?
No.
It literally started like that. You don't have to go to Disneyland to have a good day.
I only remember that you wrote a speech about this. I don't remember the speech.
You probably didn't even know that it was my frustrations about where you were at.
You should see all the speeches I've written, frustrations about you.
I think you could do a few seasons on it. Start your own episode
Maybe
podcast.
I will.
Yeah, you should. That's the way life is. But the bottom line is it just came around to starting to see that when we place responsibility on something outside of us to determine what our own internal state is, we're going about it wrong. We're going about it in a way that we want to do something different. So there's a story called The Butterfly Cocoon, and it's something that I think everybody's going to be very familiar with, but I still want to share it just for the thoughts that it will provoke. One beautiful morning, a young man was taking a stroll around his garden when he noticed a cocoon of a butterfly on a leaf. He observed a small opening appearing in the cocoon and a butterfly trying to come out of it. Thrilled to see a fantastic transformation of nature, he watched the butterfly for several hours as it struggled to force its body through a little hole in its cocoon. After a while, the butterfly seemed to stop making any progress. It was struggling so hard to get out. It appeared as if it had gotten as far as it could and could go no further. So looking at the struggle, the kind-hearted young man decided to help the butterfly. He grabbed a pair of scissors and snipped off the remaining bit of the cocoon. With the cocoon cut open, the butterfly no longer had to struggle and emerged easily. However, as it emerged, the man noticed it had a swollen body and small, shriveled wings. The man was happy that he made the butterfly come out of its cocoon without much struggle. He continued to watch the butterfly, expecting that at any moment the wings would dry out, enlarge, and expand to support the swollen body, which would contract in time. Unfortunately, neither its wings expanded nor the swollen body reduced. In fact, the butterfly spent the rest of its very short life crawling around on the ground with a swollen body and small wings, unable to fly. Although with good intentions, the man hindered the growth of the butterfly. What the man in his kindness and haste did not understand was that the restricting cocoon and the struggle required for the butterfly to get through the tiny opening were nature's way of forcing fluid from the body of the butterfly into its wings so that it could be ready for flight once it achieved its freedom from the cocoon. I love this story.
That's amazing that even nature is designed that way for a butterfly.
Yeah. Yeah, the struggle is necessary. And even like looking to our story and what that marriage course did for me to learn the tactics that I learned to help you come into a different space was probably just all part of what really needed to happen to keep moving forward. One of the greatest things is that we can gently help our loved ones into a different space, and then we have to keep giving some of the weight back to them. Right? Or they never transfer that fluid from their body into their wings. They don't fly. So do you remember, Jake, when we had finally moved into this house that we're in now, and we started watching something that Joe Dispenza put out, and he talked about how addicting our negative emotions are, and that our brain then feeds off of it and creates more situations to be able to create the environment that it's used to. You remember learning that?
I do. I remember. And I remember that it was so redeeming.
Yeah.
To understand what happens inside the brain, especially when it's for an extended period of time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I would never profess that what I went through would be as bad as what others go through, you know, but to know that I went through something that was basically a horrible mental state for 14 years, and for whatever my brain would have been doing to literally rewire itself with the neural pathways and all this science, that
chemicals and the addictions
that we've now learned.
Yeah. I just remember how you said redeeming, and I think that another word to describe it was such relief. Mm-hmm. Like you felt like you could finally breathe, that someone had spoken a truth about the way that your life was, the way that your brain functioned. And it was like, finally getting a hall pass as a kid.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It was like finally like, wait, so I'm okay? Wait, so everything I've been going through, like nothing's like bad. I'm not like a horrible person or something. Right. You know what I mean? Like sometimes our brain tells us these lies that we then attach to. And I think for you, there was just a lot of freedom in going, okay, so it's not my fault that my brain got addicted to those negative feelings and those patterns.
It's so easy to beat ourselves up, when something like that goes on for so long. Mm-hmm. Kind of these thoughts of, man, what's wrong with me? Why can't I just get out of this funk? Mm-hmm. And I think it's so important to really understand what is going on inside your brain, mm-hmm. to understand how the most simple of steps can completely put you on a different path.
Because I think in learning that, you also learned that your brain was only functional for a small amount of the day. And then when you learned that, you were like, that was a huge part of the relief.
Everything made sense.
Yeah.
I remember there was just one particular episode of what we were listening to with Joe Dispenza. Oh, The Formula, it's mm-hmm. called. And I was just eating this content up. It just, mm-hmm. it all made perfect sense from a scientific perspective, mm-hmm. that it wasn't just me and something that's just wrong with me. It's like, this is how our bodies work. And mm-hmm. if you don't take care of yourself a certain way, it's going to cause your brain and your body to keep going down this wrong path.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about the taking care of, because obviously we described in the last episode, we had been through, and specifically you had been through so much that it almost feels like it would be really difficult for someone to say, hey, take care of yourself when you're in the middle of that. I mean, that's an enormous amount of stress for that long, right?
Right.
And we had a mantra when we were in the middle of all of that. We had a mantra about peace and really about letting the Lord fight our battles. And that was something that divinely came to us. That was the stance that we were supposed to hold. But looking back now on peace and allowing that to be part of our internal state, now I know how to approach that. Now I actually know the steps that I would do to keep that part of my life a little bit more. So ultimately, let's kind of dive into that. What else would you do differently? Because there's an element of that we've talked about where we do things for other people. We help people to come into a different space. We've kind of dove into the idea that your brain gets addicted to different patterns and different ways of functioning and shuts down and all of these different things that we learned. That was really amazing and incredible. Now knowing the things that you know, what are things that you would say that you would actually do different, that maybe you would choose?
Even with you asking that question, I'm thinking about, this whole story of Chase. Mm-hmm. In the previous episode, we're talking more about our life situation and me dealing with my own thoughts and issues with suicide. And this is all coming from, this podcast that happens to be talking about suicide, and then my story with Chase. Mm-hmm. And so for me personally, knowing what I know now, and even things that you and I have recently researched as we've wanted to talk more about Chase and suicide, is even just realizing the importance of being in communication with someone. So if we go back to my story in the previous episode, I mean, how many years was it that you actually have no idea that that every day is this like molecular, struggle of anxiety that I have, where I feel like I'm constantly this vibrational shaking, at this, cellular level, if we call it that, and that it's leading into all of these horrible thoughts about myself and thoughts about suicide. Now
for me as the wife, it became what your personality and the person that you were becoming. And it was such a slow shift that if you would have asked me like 10 years ago, is this the guy you married? No, but because it was such a slow shift. And in the back of my mind, there was space where I was like, yeah, Dad's just going through a lot right now. Or, I need to give him space because there's a lot.
Yeah.
But then
we're dealing with a lawsuit. We're dealing with ups and downs, with me having been in the mortgage business all those years, there's years that are great. There's years that are rough, right. And so it all gets intertwined, together.
But the important part to point out is that it became your personality when that's not really who you are.
Right.
At all. And that, if you're ever showing up, or if your spouse or some of your loved ones aren't really showing up as who they are.
Yeah, or who you know them to be.
Yeah.
At their, the best version of themselves that you've seen.
Right.
There's something going on.
Yeah. And I would say a red flag, but not in the arena of like rush in the arena of gently go in and love and figure out the ways that you can help them shift. Because if you can help them shift, then they can get to a point where they can see that they need to shift. That's the pivotal part of this episode. That's the part that's the really important element, is that we all then start to understand and learn that our internal state is our responsibility. It seems very simple, and it's something that I think is like out there more than it was even when we were going through all of this. But I think that us needing to accept that responsibility first, and then learning what it is that we can do to be able to keep that state. I think those things are the pivotal markers.
Right. Well, and for everybody listening to this podcast, you're going to have this range of those that are listening to this and they're doing fine, but someone else in their life is not, whether they know it or not. And if they even know that someone is struggling with mental health and may even be struggling with suicidal thoughts, it creates this awareness of what they can do to help that situation. But if it's somebody that is like me, that has struggled or is struggling with suicidal thoughts, like to now have the awareness that it's actually proven how important it is to be able to talk about suicide. Because I look back to when I first opened up to you, that's something that I had been struggling with for a while, and you would have been completely oblivious to that. Our entire family, extended family, everybody would be completely oblivious to that. They could look at our, the pictures we have of our family on our walls, and see this, this beautiful family of 5, and no one would have thought, that Jake's struggling with, life or death decisions, with what they see as a smiling face, in the photos. Just like the case with so many that the world has lost, that have been such a surprise, when people pass away that way. And soon after I had, shared that with you, and you've helped me go through all these steps to be in a better state, it was so therapeutic for me to talk more about it. It was extremely therapeutic for me to reach out to my family and to go back through all of the events that happened leading up to Chase passing away, which was in whatever episode that I did, that I kind of have that short little synopsis of what had happened, that day, the whole setting, everything, that took me a while to actually put that together. And that was the result of me going back to my parents and my sisters and piecing together everything that we could remember about that, and to be able to go back and then share an audio version of that with them, and then you, of course, were involved. And so that was so good for me to be talking about suicide. So back to your question, what would I, do differently knowing what I know now? It would have been to be talking to someone much sooner than I did.
So are you saying that the situation with you being able to talk about Chase and about diving through what happened for Chase, it was therapeutic because it was allowing you to talk about suicide, even though it wasn't necessarily about you?
The short answer is yes. Even with me doing that project, nobody knew at that point how much I was struggling with suicidal thoughts. I happened to do that, we'll call it like the first draft, because, I've since changed it a little bit, for kind of making its official debut publicly in your podcast, a couple episodes back. But doing that project was the timing of, 20 something years, the anniversary of when Chase had passed away.
So ultimately, one thing that we've learned on our quest is that talking about suicide actually helps someone who's struggling with it, where people sometimes think if they tiptoe around it, that it's actually benefiting the person, or that the person who needs to talk about it tiptoes around it because they don't want it to become reality when they talk about it. And the truth is when you're able to say something out loud, you're able to see it from a different perspective. And, when I called the suicide hotline myself to have inquiry and to talk about this project that we were doing, just to preface, I did call and say, hey, this is not emergency. If you need to take another call, please do. But then I wanted to ask. And they were very clearly stating that talking about suicide helps suicide. It's the opposite of what some people might think. And just reinstating that the majority of people who call the suicide hotline are supporters of people who are going through it. I think that's important. But I think ultimately what we're talking about with shifting and being responsible for our internal states is what I would do differently, being able to learn that that's actually what rewrites your brain. That when you are in a position where you have something happening inside and you're sitting in low feelings, that the longer that you stay in those low feelings, the more you're training your brain to stay in those low feelings. And so, it's kind of interesting because there have been times when I have seen, I don't know, this is very descriptive of your state, Jake. But I've seen you in fetal position a lot. And I've seen you taking showers that I know were not good for your brain. Because you were turning and sitting in low feelings. Right?
That's true.
And do you remember when I learned more and more and more about this? It's hard to not become exhausted as the supporter. And I remember going into the shower and saying, get out. Come on. We're done. Get out of the shower. This isn't a good place for you to be. And we need to shift.
Which, as a side note, it's so interesting, the opposite of this, because there's times where, I personally love taking a long shower when I'm in, a very positive state or
Sure.
a high vibrational state, because all of my ideas so much is better for me when I'm in that state.
Mm-hmm.
So then I tell myself, there's like, the shower is just where you want to be when you want to be in your head, but if your brain is telling you the wrong way, you want to be in your head and you want to just be be sitting in here for 45 minutes, an hour, and just
being in low.
be in your head.
But
and maybe something good will come out of this.
Being low in your head.
Yeah.
So ultimately, looking at what you've learned about being responsible, would you say that it's easier for you now when you're in a low state to be able to shift? To be able to at least recognize that you need to shift? To then be able to do something about that?
It's way easier. You know, there's times that, you know, if I'm in a poor mental state, you know, where maybe I'm not taking the time or the energy to get out of that quickly, but I'm keenly aware of the steps that I can take to be able to get out of that and to be into the state that I want to be in.
Right. And we had an interesting conversation the other day. It was kind of a laughable because, like, I know you know better and you know better, but you were like wanting to stay there for a minute because something had happened and we were feeling low. And I was like, okay, like, what could you do if you like wanted to move out of this? And like, you got that smile on your face, but then you quickly wiped it off. And I think you said sleep it off because you knew that would like make me like
set you off a little.
Yeah.
Come on, Jake. What's another reason?
Yeah. What's another way to shift?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And then
I was starting to have fun with it where I was saying everything except for what I knew would be your, you know, top things that you would say.
Yeah.
Or that I should say.
Right. But it's cool because you were able to draw out the things that actually are not beneficial to you. Waiting it out, sleeping it off, waiting for something outside of you to change your state. Those are all very ineffectual ways of shifting your state. And so much of the time, we wait around for that to happen. And when we're waiting, we're actually training our brain to continue the patterns of the low and the sad and the hurt and the fear and the anxiety and all the things. But the moment that we recognize that we need to shift, we can. So ultimately, to be able to shift your state, you want to choose something that actually is going to leave you feeling better than you did before. Something that actually lifts you. And we've talked about before how your emotions and the way that you can check into these higher elevated emotions can trump the lower feelings. And so, you know, if I were to go into Jake and say, hey, Jake, get out of the shower. Come on, babe. Then we got to go and do something else that's actually going to lift him. Not just try to go get dressed and move through your day and like really, really, you know, dig deep. No. Go do something that feels good. You know, when Jake was up against only having an hour a day, you know, when you were in that state, babe, like for us, if we would have known, for you to just go give it what you had and then go on a mountain bike ride.
Yeah.
Would have been pivotal. So there's these things that we can do and we can check into. And anytime that you are checked into love, peace, happiness, gratitude, any of those higher flying feelings, joy, that completely overrides these low feelings. So as a basic equation, we need to know and understand that. You need to know that when you check into something higher, you negate lower. So whenever you're feeling low and you begin to recognize it, and the faster you recognize it, the better, because you get to rewrite the pattern in your brain and you get to teach your body to feel something different. So no matter what, being able to check into something better. Jake, the one thing that I want to ask you or talk to you about is that the other day we did a heart coherence session, you and I, where there was a point when you were really, and I don't even remember what it was, but you were not doing well. And we sat down and I asked you to identify where you were at, right?
Yeah, and I think this is a really important example because I've been, for a while, been operating in a great state. Mm-hmm. But inside of that is still the highs and lows that come. and so there's some very pivotal career decisions and business decisions that I'm making right now. And so some of it's been very difficult and challenging, and then I'm relying on people to be in integrity to get back to me when they say they are, and then I don't hear from them, and it just drags things out, and so that's just kind of set the background, like that I was just feeling very down and just a little frustrated that I'm not getting to a resolution on things. And then you do this exercise with me that's basically able to take me from where I can put myself on this chart a certain way, this imaginary chart that we're drawing on the carpet, tell me where you're at here. This side, this column is, feeling.
Yeah, I basically had him identify that he was in stress and negativity so that he could clearly see where he was at. And then we did some breathing, we did some exercises to clear out the negativity, and then I brought him into heart coherence.
And what's beautiful about this is we're talking like that you've taken some of your training and some very simple things, and that within 10 minutes, I go from where I'm putting my dot on this chart on the carpet a certain way to suddenly feeling completely elevated and back to my normal self.
Not just normal, right? You were checked into excited. And
that's not my normal self.
But the point is that I knew that no one's pulling the wool over Jake's eyes. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, he's not going to pretend it worked. The greatest thing is when we were done with that meditation and he opened his eyes and he had truly dropped into heart coherence and dropped into a feeling where he was feeling excited. And he was using a memory of the past to propel what he was moving into in the future. And when he opened his eyes from this meditation, Jake, your arms...
I was beautiful.
Whatever. Your arms were stretched out wide to the side. And that was just a natural way. You were so full. You were full, And so there's ways to shift that are effective. There's ways, you can listen to comedy, you can listen to something uplifting, you can drop into gratitude in various forms.
Well, and I think that's the point, is there's actually this list of things that we can do, because I remember you've worked with me on this before, and even as a family we've reviewed these things, and we've gone over a lot of information that's super helpful with this. And I think that's the point, right? That listeners understand that there is this list, and it includes some things that are actually so simple, easy, and don't even take much time, that when done the right way, you can completely get out of a negative way you're feeling or a bad state that you're in, and within a matter of minutes completely transform into something different.
Mm-hmm. So for me, knowing heart coherence and knowing the power that heart coherence has to create energy in your body to help you shift is one of the very best tactics. It's great to know all the others. It's great to love a mountain bike ride. It's great to know that we don't want to try to solve problems from inside the problem. Move out of the problem, go get yourself feeling good, and then the problem looks different, and all of a sudden you have a different answer, And so many times we try to force our way through life versus knowing that we have all the capability to check into a higher feeling. And then it helps iron out the pathway that's in front of us. And not only does it do that, but it rewrites the default in our body. And so the way that our brain and our subconscious brain works is that now we want to move forward through life, and our brain says life should feel good. Life should feel full of love and excitement and joy and all these things. And then it brings things into your life. Your subconscious mind is like your most loyal assistant. So if it thinks things should be going a certain way and they're not, then it brings something into your life to bring evidence for you to be able to feel that feeling again. And it's really whatever you've trained your body to be able to feel, whether that's the low or the good, the high vibrations. So ultimately, I would say, for me, knowing what I know now, and Jake, you might have more. But to me, it's like looking back on what we did, the food brought us into a higher vibration. It brought our bodies into a higher vibration. And I will say that when you bring yourself into a different elevated vibration, that automatically you have different tendencies towards what you reach for food anyway. So I'm not saying that food's like a bad place to start. It's a great place to start because it actually does elevate you also. But if I were to say like anything, I would say learn heart coherence. Learn the way that it helps you rewrite your brain and reset the patterns for your life. And then that way it allows you to keep your state differently. And when we keep our state differently, everything in our life can then be different. Ultimately, I think it's very great to remember and to recognize this, that going back to the cocoon and the experiment, is that our struggle brings strength. The things that we go through, because now, Jake, you know differently, and we've been on a long road that has brought us to a state that the moment that you get feeling low, like you at least know you need to shift versus waiting it out. And sometimes we're great at that and sometimes we're not, and that's okay. But the knowledge of knowing that it's creating a pattern and what do you want more of in your life, that's pretty motivating to want to shift soon.
Something that's interesting for me is I look at times in the past when something has happened and it completely shifts my energy and who I'm being in a very negative way. And that even my thought in that moment is knowing my own body that like when that happens, it actually triggers like a chemical release a certain way, which is a side note, is another thing that we learned so heavily about in some of the work with Joe Dispenza, that some people's bodies are so prone to the way that a chemical reaction occurs. And that for me, it's like, oh, great, here we go. I already know it's going to take me, it might take me, 6 hours, 8 hours. It's going to take me until the next day once I've been able to even sleep this off. And then hopefully it's a good day tomorrow. And then it'll all just kind of dissipate and I'll start to feel better. I'll get back to baseline or where I want to be. Whereas now I know all of these ways or these methods that I can change that for me within a 10, 15 minute period. And it's amazing.
Yeah, and you totally rewrite your life. Ultimately, I think it's just really important to remember that we don't have business hanging out in bad spaces. We think the melancholy of that is somehow feeding us. The victimhood, the, getting on it. We always talk about getting on it or getting off of it. Like, getting on it makes you feel like you're right. Getting on it makes you feel like, the other person owes you something or whatever it is. But you're able to completely rewrite your life when you get off of it. When you let it go, when you shift your state and you're responsible for it, you can see the solution. Jake, our son has asked us before, in learning about how much there is to handle around mental conditions and how much personal responsibility that it takes. And he's made the comment to me before, why does it take so much work? And it's almost a moment of sadness recognizing how many people he knows who struggle. Why does it take so much work for us? What would you say? Is there something that you could lend if he were to ask you that right now, pointedly?
To me, it feels like there's a couple of trains of thought with this. One of them is that I really believe that we are in this different world now, where you take a look at what's now being proven from a nutritional standpoint. You go back to this conversation about glyphosates and how it has completely infiltrated our food supply and what they've now linked to mental conditions because of this. You look at all the studies that are out now about how social media affects us. So if this is going to continue to be part of the majority of people's lives, then it can take a lot of work to consistently be on top if we're constantly allowing these things to be a part of us.
Mm-hmm. And on top of that, it's interesting how much our attention is being trained to not be ours anymore. Like that our own brain, they say that in the first however many seconds of a Marvel movie, that you see so much and you process so much that your brain, we're actually training our brains to like need stimulation, needs constant distractions, like we're only getting like tiny little bits. We're missing the periods of deep work that working with our brain and inside of our brain brings health and balance. And so it's a huge disconnect with the way that our brain needs to and wants to function. So just inside of that, with what you're saying.
And on the flip side, we could say, yes, it does take a lot of work, but then if you realize that from, let's just call it some master list of all the different things that you can do, from that list is going to be some very simple things that would resonate with someone on how they could be able to be in a better mental state. And for some, it might be like where they're keeping a list. It includes a list of videos or something that makes them laugh, where they can be able to feel some happiness or joy, in that regard. For me, I can go on a ride on one of our electric scooters. I can go on my e-mountain bike. And if I'm listening to fun music while doing that, within 15, 20 minutes, I can come back and be in a completely different state if I'm already feeling down. And yes, there's the times that, I'll do a meditation or, I'll do something that's related to heart coherence and the different things that you've shown me. And then of course I see you do it on a very regular basis, and that it helps you stay in this very high vibrational state. And so when you really break that down, some of those things are actually so simple, and you just need the discipline to implement some very simple things, and then it doesn't have to be hard.
Yeah, I love that answer. It's true. Because once we truly learn the formula, there's freedom. Once we truly learn that the world is out there to, recondition our brains to a way that they were never supposed to function. And that it is our responsibility more now than it ever has been in any other generation to make sure that we are being responsible for what's going on upstairs. And more importantly, what's going on inside of our heart. Because if we can condition what we're feeling, our heart gives more messages to our brain. It's an incredible thing. In general, knowing that the struggle and figuring it out, just like how the cocoon and the beautiful butterfly has to figure it out, we have to figure it out. We got to figure it out. And once we figure it out, it's actually a pretty simple process. We just can't have anybody cutting open our cocoon. Okay, and mainly that's us trying to do things that make it simple for us. It's really so simple when we just do it the right way. There's a lot of freedom in knowing that you have power to do it. You have complete power to rewrite the patterns and the things that are happening in your life by very simple things. Staying in those high elevated vibrations and figuring out what it is for you in your life that helps you check into them. And I hope that by us sharing our story, that it brings just a little bit more enlightenment to yours. And that you can see that the more that you're in charge of your state, that you have more power than you think you do. Hey friend, I hope that you have loved our collection of episodes that we've done on suicide. Even if it's not something that you are immersed with currently, I'm hoping that it brought you a lot to think about. I'm hoping that it helped you to think of ways to be sensitive towards others who we really have no idea what they're going through, right? Remember the possums? And I always love encouraging you to share the episodes if you know of someone who could use them. Before we close, I just want to remind you to make sure that you click on the link in the show notes and get registered for the mini course, Learning to Use the Power of Your Heart. And as we wrap up, I want to share 2 short thoughts. One is a quote that came in the time where Jake and I were really trying to maintain our peace. And we actually have it printed on a canvas, and it's in our living room right where we can see it. It says, peace does not mean to be in a place where there is no noise, trouble, or hard work. Peace means to be in the midst of those things and still be calm. Right? The whole idea of the quote, meaning you can be going through hard things and maintain a certain state. Something can throw you, but you don't have to stay there. Super important things to start knowing how to internalize and then how to manage. And I think that's one of the greatest tricks of our life is to be able to learn how to manage the hard things without letting it affect our state. And please never misinterpret me when I'm talking about this in a way that says we don't need to process it and we don't need to feel the bad things. It's when we're feeling them, there's no point to the feeling except for making us feel bad. There's incredible information in our feelings, and I would never ask you to run from that. Completely figuring all of that out and processing it is part of the health of it. But too often we feel obligated to stick there. So I just wanted to bring that up to help you percolate in the idea that you can be in hard things and still have a peaceful state. And I promise that by doing that, it won't continue to get worse and worse and worse and worse. You'll have so much more capability to handle it, and then different things will come your way. And then the other short thought that I wanted to share with you was from this quote that says, "Don't worry about the time you lose to despair. The time you have afterward has just doubled its value." And that's something I wish I would have really taken apart with Jake on the episode. By the way, tell me how you liked having Jake with us for the full episode. That was kind of fun, right? I would love if you have something to say about that. If you want to send me an email at hello@myfriendmisha.com or send me a DM. But it was fun to have him as kind of a guest for the whole episode. And I hope you agree. But ultimately with this quote, an idea that we sometimes get hung up thinking like, oh my gosh, I wasted my life away. I think that would be really easy for Jake and I to kind of look back on our life and like see how much of it was wasted in these yuckiness. And the truth is that we're stronger and we're better on the other side. I love how it says afterward has just doubled its value. So I just wanted to leave you with that so that you can be reminded that it's all for purpose and it can bring you so much. And I'll leave you with that. Until next time, my friend.